Coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
Best thing I found to do is talk to the candidate about, okay, we're here, our emotions could be kicking in, but let's think about what brought us here. Again, our logic. Let's think about this decision, staying put or leaving. Let's think about what that's going to look like in a month, 3 months, a year, 18 months. I think all the lessons we learned to be successful in this business, we learned in kindergarten. And a lot of us have forgotten. Call people back. When I call somebody back, they're like, I can't believe you just called me back. I'm like, really? Like, what's everybody else doing?
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast because my guest has had a 100% close rate on the last 3 years for every single deal that he's placed. But here's the secret. He's understand emotions versus logic. And where the shift happens, where all the decisions are logical, and then you have to walk both the client and the candidates through the emotional journey. And he has mastered that so well. Clients come to him. He is the go-to person in his space because they know that he will fill the positions and he will find and fill the hard to fill positions. So I'm super excited to have Steve Swan on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks for having me on.
Real quick, before we start doing a deep dive in your background, talk a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. So the Swan Group, we're in New Jersey. We're in the heart of pharmaceutical land, and we focus on biotech and pharmaceutical. However, we do operate around the country, right? California, Massachusetts, New York area, and we've always focused on technology. So it's all been technology-based, cybersecurity and analytics and data. That's kind of morphed over the years, right? I mean, back in the day when I started 25 years ago, anything technology was like three things, right? Now anything technology is like everything. So you got to be careful what you wish for. But now when the analytics roles and the data roles come up, they give us a call, which we've done a great job with, I think.
Awesome. So okay, you're doing all that now, but how did you end up in this wonderful world of recruiting?
Well, so how I ended up in it, my mom, that's the short answer, right? I'm one of four boys, and growing up, my father was a Wall Street guy, and we're all within 7 years. My mother decided she wanted domestic help around the house, so she couldn't find it. There weren't anybody that placed nannies back then. So she started a business that hired and placed, back then they called them babysitters. And I didn't even tell you this before. This is all news to you. In New Jersey, she grew to 6 offices, placing babysitters. Yeah. She even got to the point where she went down and talked in front of the state legislator about minimum wage back then and things like that. But she grew to 6 offices, and then she got into IT when IT became IT. And back then it was data processing and punch cards, right?
Yeah.
And she was always after me to join her. I was the only one she would ask to join her. My brother, she didn't talk to them, but one's in investment banking, one's in real estate, one has his own company. And so she kept asking me. And then 25 years ago, right before we had our first kid, I said, you know what, Mom, I'm going to do it. And I jumped on with her. I didn't take a salary, didn't take a draw, didn't take anything. I said, if I sink, I'm going on my own. And it took me 9 months, made my first placement, and here I am, still doing it today.
Okay, so what'd you do before you decided to join your mom?
I was mainly in sales. Well, I was on Wall Street. So I worked for Bloomberg, and I also worked for some brokerage firms where I was trading fixed income debt.
And what was that decision? You were just like, I'm sick of this. Maybe I'll go join my mom, or was it just like, recruiting is my calling?
Well, so here's what it was, really. It was more of a lifestyle call for me. So I knew I would do fine on Wall Street. I knew I would do fine where I was. It's just my commute was close to 2 hours a day. We were about to start having kids. My wife, who's been at the same company for 36 years, she's at Bloomberg. She's been there forever. We didn't want her to leave her role, right? So I said, you know what? Without a commute, because my mom had an office about 5 miles from my house. She's been doing this forever, and she had 6 offices, and she's hired a whole bunch of folks. So I trusted that she knew what she was talking about when she said, you'd be good at this. So she handed me a phone and a computer and said, go, and I went, and there you go.
Did you have any training, or is it just open the book and start calling?
I had no training. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't do anything formal when it came to any sort of training until probably about 10 years ago, really. I interacted with a bunch of owners. I interacted with a bunch of folks at some of those NAPS conferences and things like that, right? But I didn't know, And then what I started doing, like I said, about 10 years ago is, folks do the coaching, right? You spend a certain amount of money and they call you and this is how we roll. And they're calling me and they're saying, you're doing what? Like, you have 17 openings you're working on right now. Why don't you have 3 other people working for you? I'm like, well, I don't know. This is what I do. Like, this is how I do it. And so that's why I got so adept at working on everything IT. I can go from one to the other and keep it together and really focus on it and get them done. So, and a lot of folks that I've hired over the years, they can't do that. I just always assumed that everybody could, but they.
Yeah, I mean, that's why your mom is like, this guy's a winner. I mean, he's my son. Of course he's a winner, but like, he'll figure it out. And so before we start going back into like, more recent story, you say it took what? It was 8-9 months to make your first placement?
9 months exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, 9 months, and you said you took no draw, no commission, about ready to have a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, during that time period, did you ever think about quitting?
Yes and no. I mean, the only reason why my wife would always ask me, do you know what you're doing? I'm like, I got this. And in my mind, I'm going, I don't know if I got this, So, the only time that I would think about quitting was because she would say, hey, what are you doing? And again, the kid was like, I mean, she's getting bigger and bigger, right? So I did think about it, but anything else that I needed to do would have been back in New York City or would have been traveling. And that just, I knew going forward would have worked counter. I mean, I saw a lot of games. I was at a ton of stuff. My girls call me the PTA dad, right? So it was a lifestyle thing for me, and it worked really well, and still working well. My kids are gone, but still working really well. So yeah, I did think about it. It was a struggle. It was tough, but got through it.
But you knew that this was a way that you could really focus on the family.
Yes, exactly. Yep, I knew that.
That's awesome. So I want to kind of like just jump into like the secret sauce, like emotion versus logic. And I know that was kind of the hook of the story, the hook of the podcast. And we'll kind of like walk through some stories that you told me like offline. But
sure,
when you talk about emotion versus logic, what do you mean?
Well, so let me go all the way back here. I mean, my mom always talked about that with me. She would always say, she would talk to me about buyer's remorse. She would talk to me about all sorts of different things that would get in your way as you coming around turn 3 and turn 4 with a candidate. I was a psychology major and pre-med in college. So that kind of helped when it came to all this. And I studied it a bit. One of my favorite books is Charlie Munger wrote a book. He was the gentleman that just died. He was the co-chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. I've gone to the meetings a bunch, and Charlie's the best. Bottom line's everything. So, he talked a lot. His book was called From Darwin to Munger. And he talked a lot about just emotionally, humans haven't been set up to make large decisions. Buying that house, buying that car, making a job switch, buying a stock. Those are decisions that, emotions kick in at the end. And then all of a sudden, the decision-making process, which is usually logical, gets all messed up. We all start telling ourselves stuff that, gets us messed up. I mean, I meditate every day to try and keep that in line. I started doing that in 2015. And so I started noticing what my mom was saying over the years. You're not getting in the first 3, 4, 5, 6 years, You got to have a lot of heartache between here and there. You're a ton. And this business, there's so much you can't control, right? But the one thing you can control is how things are viewed and how you look at them and how they look at them, right? I mean, I can go through the whole thing of how I handled it if you want me to,
Yeah, well, let's kind of like walk through that in a bit.
Sure.
But, I love that that's kind of like one of your secret sauces. But like, I know you have a lot of business that comes to you. You've been in the space for a while. You've developed some strong relationships.
Absolutely.
How did you become that go-to person?
So I think what I did, Benjamin, and I'm part of the Sanford Rose Network, so I talked to them, all those owners and stuff, and what they have conveyed to me, because again, I've only been here. I mean, I've been in my cave in the Swan Group for 25 years. I've never worked at another firm. I get to know the company, right? So unfortunately, I do a lot of IT, like I said, the security, the ERP, the whatever systems they are, and then I work with them to help them find a new CIO and a new CISO. And we sit down and we talk about your organization, where you are, where you're heading, those kinds of things. But then I fill the roles that are underneath those roles, So one company I've placed 70 folks at, which sounds ridiculous, 71 folks. But the reason being is because I got to know the company and I'm able to work on different IT roles and understand, what the needs are in each one of those IT roles. But half of it is understanding the personality of the company. And that's where I think I've made a difference, right? That's why I get the repeat business because, somebody from the commercial team will call me and they need an IT person when they just heard I filled something over in R&D and how I did it or what I did. And a lot of them are obviously hard to fill roles, right? Otherwise, and they shouldn't be calling me on something that's not hard to fill, or else, they can do it themselves. But yeah, that's how I became the go-to guy, is really getting to learn organizations and really putting the right folks into the organization, because I get to understand candidates' drivers, the company's drivers. And that's where I think us as recruiters have a difference over the company, right? Because we get to talk to an individual, we get to talk to a candidate prior to them really seeing much of a description, right? First we identify, then we qualify. And as we qualify, then we get them interested in the role. Well, a company has to first post a role or whatever. The candidate sees the position and they already think that they're interested. So they're 3 steps down the road from my process. They've already been identified and in their minds qualified, and they're interested. Well, everybody's going to be interested if they're looking for a role, right? So me and the candidate will talk about their qualifications and their drivers versus the company's drivers before we even get too deep into the description. Written descriptions, 25 years, maybe I've read 20 of them. I like talking to the manager, and the manager will tell me what they're looking for,
It's so often when the manager says exactly what they need, and you look at the job description they give you, and you're like, "There's nothing on there."
Well, yeah, because there's when the candidate interviews with 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 people, they're all stakeholders in the role, and they all had 2 or 3 sentences that they put in there, so they each have a different thing that they're looking for. The manager's got 2 or 3 sentences in the middle. There was one company I used to work with where their descriptions were completely pre-canned. The only thing they could change is the title, and so if they could only change the title, the description didn't tell them anything about what they were looking for, which was why they needed me, because they couldn't put out custom descriptions,
That's crazy. So that one company that you place 71 people at, how do you even get that as a client? Start from the very beginning. How did you land that as a client? And then how did you work your way through the organization to place so many people?
I was at my desk one day, and I got a call from 3 folks, and they said their names on the speakerphone. And I thought it was friends making fun of me. "Hi, is this Steve Swan? We understand you're the go-to guy for hard-to-fill senior-level IT roles within biotech." I said, "Yeah, that's me, but who's this again?" And they just gave me their first names, and they were just, typical first names, And I just kept trying to get them to talk. So I'm thinking it's friends of mine making fun of me or something. It was a weird phone call. And I pretty much said, "Listen, guys, let me research your company. I'd never heard of you guys." It ended up being a company with about 600 or 700 people at the time. "And let me call you tomorrow," right? And they said, "Well, if you never call us back, know one thing, we're going to be the next big pharma, and our stock's going to several $100s," when it was at 10 or 15. And I thought to myself, well, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd have a lot of money, right? So I did call them back the next day. They had been working on this role for 9 months. I filled it in a month. And then the roles just kept coming, and they would, all the different recruiters internally would come to me in different areas because they knew that I could sell the company. It was a tough sell where they were physically located, right? Because I asked them where they were located, and I was like, "That's your problem. That's part of your problem." And so I just kept working my way around the organization, and eventually filled their CIO, their CTO, and all that stuff. And it just kept coming over the years. It's been 16 years. The company's now over 10,000, 15,000 employees, something like that. So it's pretty big now.
Wow. Talk about growth. Do they still call you now?
They do, yeah. They'll call me. Yeah. I haven't done as much in the last year or so, because as companies get that big, they start using, all sorts of RPOs and things like that, right? So It's tough. But yeah.
If you could share with a recruiter how you developed those relationships, because it's not just filling the job. I get it. There's a lot of recruiters that can fill the job, but how did you work those relationships to have this be a long-term, over a decade-long client?
Well, so half of it is, again, those drivers, the individual's drivers and the company's drivers, really matching those. And people continually, I got a call last week from one of the guys I placed there 8 years ago, 10 years ago. When I first called him, I actually told him I wasn't going to present him because he was almost a 2-hour drive to the office. He said, "You get me the job, I'll worry about the drive." He's still doing the drive 5 days a week. But he called me not to leave. He called me to thank me for all I had done for him, which is a great feeling, right? He said, "You're the one that put me here, and I'm really excited that I'm here, and thank you very much." Even though we're not using you as much as we used to, right? And they're still using me, but not like they did. But, first it's making the right match and really caring about the candidate journey. And then secondly, it's about really understanding the organization, being able to sell it. And then them looking around and saying, "Where did that person come from? Where'd that person come from? Where'd that person come?" Then they start figuring, aha, They all came from Swan. Now, you get to a certain point, right, where I did with 70 plus folks, where they look at a number and they say, look how much we're spending on Swan. We could do this ourselves, And I don't know, can they? I mean, the folks that I place there will continually call me and say, hey, man, you've done a great job up here. I don't know why they're not asking you for more. I'm like, well, it's a procurement kind of thing, right? That kicks in for them.
How are you keeping track of these relationships? Do you have them all in like a database? Do you have them like a tickler? Do you have like on a spreadsheet, like to call them once a year? Like,
no,
how are
I
you
keep them
following up?
Yeah, I keep them in a database, and I do follow up with them. I'll send them Christmas cards and things like that, right? I'll ping them. If I see them on LinkedIn, just, hey, how you doing? I'll have lunch. I have lunch with a lot of folks. So before COVID, believe it or not, I did the best I could to see every candidate before they went in on an interview.
Oh, okay.
I know, man. It was a lot. And that was old school for my mom, right? And I saw a lot of people. I mean, I was doing a lot of lunches, but after nobody wants to see it much anymore, right? I mean, I think since COVID, I've done 15 or 20 lunches, But I would go to the companies a lot. I'd walk around. I'd go say hi to all the folks that I worked with in HR and the hiring managers, and then we'd end up going out to lunch and so on and so forth. I even got to the point where I would go out with some of the technical leaders, especially at that company. I'd get calls from HR after that. What are they telling you? What are they saying? I'm like, really? So.
Shouldn't you be knowing this?
Yeah, exactly. It was funny. Yeah, it was really fun. So.
Well, you're doing excellent. You're a go-to person. Like, I feel like you don't have to do that much business development, but when you do business development, how do you do it?
So it's changing, right? Business development's changing. So like I said, for like the first 10, 15 years, I did almost nothing. I mean, I'd do one project and then, somebody would have left from this company to go to that company. Hey, you got to call Swan. He's getting this done, Now it's changed, right? So now with business development, I mean, I started a podcast, right? To get some recognition. Yeah, it's been good. I actually started that about a year ago to interview my CIO buddies because I know so many of them. And everybody, all the CIOs, they definitely want to help each other. And, they also don't each want to reinvent the wheel every time they run into an issue. They know that Benjamin's had this issue before. So, hey, I met Benjamin or I saw Benjamin do a podcast with Swan. I'm going to ping Benjamin and say, hey, saw you on Swan's podcast. Tell me how you handled X, Y, and Z, or can we chat about this or whatever, So that's part of it. Another part of it is just, like you said, continually staying in front of folks and reaching out to them and understanding what they need and what they want, staying on top of the market, seeing who's doing what as far as funding, phase 2, phase 3, wherever they are in their process. And then there's others that don't know you and I don't know them, but they have technology needs and they don't know where to turn. And if you start hearing about some of those things, you're reaching out to them or you're pinging them, or some of your other CIO buddies are telling, this company, hey, you might want to sniff around with Swan and see what he's got for you or how he can help you. So there's a lot of different angles, right? There's a lot of different prongs to this.
I do, because I have a podcast right here that you're speaking on. I love that you have a podcast for your space because, it's something that we need to get back into is a podcast for our industry, since I don't recruit recruiters. But it is like the super Trojan horse to really do some deep relationships.
It is.
And get to know people. Like, what kind of business have you gotten or deeper relationships have you got because of the podcast?
I'd say, I'm getting to know my CIOs, like you said, better at a deeper level. And I'm doing a roundtable at the end of the year. So some of them had said to me, some of the CIOs from the larger companies had said, why don't you do an end of year wrap up? Get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us on and we can all talk about 24 and what we saw in 24, what we saw in 25 and do that kind of thing. And a couple of them wanted to do sort of a social, a mingle, a face-to-face. So I'm doing that. I just did 2 of those. I'm going to do a third one in January. So what I'll do is they were like, listen, man, do like appetizers and drinks. We'll even pay for it. We don't care. They said, listen, we don't want to go to a conference. We don't want to learn anything. We don't want to use our brains. We just want to bring our cards, have fun, shake hands with people, give them our card, and then we'll solve problems later offline. But, there's other organizations in my space that used to do things like this. They didn't do podcasts, but they did some of these mingles. Mm-hmm. They couldn't help themselves, though. They were starting to really do hardcore sales with, selling services or selling technologies or whatever, And I'm not doing that. I'm just letting them mingle and exchange cards. But I'm not doing more than, I think 10 would be too many. 5, 6, 7 of them, is what I've done so far. And the response has been great. I mean, people really like it.
That is such a differentiator because I think bringing people together as recruiters, we know everybody, but bringing them together is really what I've seen is almost like a superpower for a lot of like recruiters out there. So genius move on that.
It's been great. Yeah, well, it wasn't my idea. It was the CIO's idea. It was their idea. They said, hey, can you do me a favor? All these guys and girls that you have on your podcast, would you mind getting us together? I'm like, cool, And even on my podcast, I got to tell you, Benjamin, on my podcast, when all my guys are talking about AI and they're talking about how data feeds into AI and, data is the Achilles heel of AI. Well, so a data company saw some of my podcasts and they asked me to make an introduction to some of these folks. And they did, They hooked up with 3 of them and so on and so forth. And these companies are going to start growing and then they're going to, give me a call to help them out with their CTO needs or whatever they have, right? So it kind of all feeds on itself, it seems to me, right?
That's so awesome. You've been in business for like just shy. Actually, when this podcast probably goes live, it'll be 25 years.
Yes.
How have you had to reinvent yourself? And has there been multiple times you've had to reinvent yourself over the years?
So I did start, I told you that I sort of, handling a lot of different technologies. In the beginning of my career, I was mainly handling SAP, if you've ever heard of SAP. I did a lot of that for 10 or 12 years. Then after that, SAP kind of took a nosedive in popularity, right? So got more general, right? And then after my mom decided, so my mom had 6 offices, right? And after she decided to retire is when I started growing our company here. Hired an assistant, got the podcast, got a production team, got a fractional marketing team, hired a couple other folks, so kind of growing it like that. So kind of reinvented how we focus on things. The other folks here will handle some of the roles that I used to do, and I'm going to focus more on the higher level roles because I know all these folks, I know a lot of them. So I don't think my reinvention has been something super conscious, but maybe it should be more conscious.
And for listeners, especially like the, newer recruiters, because, I remember the new days for me where it was like, you had to do something. Every call, you had to get something out of it. Do you do a lot of calls where you're just like consultative and just like talking about what's going on or maybe like talking about the organization without ever doing a hard sell?
I am. I'm doing a ton of those, because when you're doing that hard sell, everybody's giving them the hard sell, They're seeing through that, right? I mean, in my opinion. And so, the more value you can add, and this, the more value you add, the more they're like, okay, this guy knows our space. This guy knows what's going on. This guy's not just here to make the placement for the transaction, which I've never been there for the transaction. I've been there to make sure that I always tell my candidates, the first call I get from you in 6 to 12 months is not, hey, this might not have been the right move. I want to hear from you, hey, I'm growing my group. Can you help? That's what I want to hear. And I get a lot of that. I get a ton of that, right? Because I'm really looking out for them and the company. And I like what we do as a group because we are truly making a difference. Yeah, we're in sales. We're selling ourselves. We're selling our services. We're selling what we can do for an organization. And there's a lot of us out there. But at the end of the day, if we're doing our jobs right, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, an individual and an organization is thinking about you at night or on the weekends. There's not many other sales jobs that happens. I used to work for Bloomberg in sales. The minute you turn your back on a sales floor, they're done thinking it's over, man. They don't care that you're even there, right? So that's one of the things that sort of made me, and on Wall Street, right, with fixed income trading and such, same sort of thing. It's a quick transaction, you're done. This, you're actually, I'm having lunch with people that I placed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or I'm helping them get to a new role. I did a podcast with a guy yesterday. I placed him, I don't know, I bet it was probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. He's now a CIO at another company. I got new cards, right? So he was at my CIO mingle. I go to give him my new card. I go, here, here's the card. He goes, I don't need your card. You're here. He goes, you're the reason I'm where I am. So I'm not forgetting you. I'm like, all right, cool, thanks, So it's just make a difference and treat others how you want to be treated. I think all the lessons we need in this business, we learned when we were in kindergarten. Some folks have forgotten that, but I think you remember and, others do as well.
Wait, say that one more time.
I think all the lessons we learned to be successful in this business, we learned in kindergarten. And a lot of us have forgotten them. Call people back. When I call somebody back, they're like, I can't believe you just called me back. I'm like, really? Like, what's everybody else doing? No other recruiters are calling you back? Like, the hard sell, I think, is just a tough one, right? I mean, folks, they're going to swallow hard, listen to you, and then they're going to be done with you, Help people out. I know it sounds a little crazy, but, and I know we do have metrics, and I know we do have numbers, and I pay attention to them too, right? So I do a sheet. I have a sheet of how many marketing calls, recruitment calls, submittals, first interviews I do, each day and each week, right? Because you got to keep that's kind of your dashboard, right? To understand where you are and what you're doing. But at the end of the day, make them all value added, all those phone calls, Don't waste people's time.
I love it. And before we head over to the quickfire questions, I want you to spend a little more time talking about your 100% close rate for the last 3 years. What have you been doing? I just had somebody fall off recently. I know it's because I live in the world of security clearances and there's many things I can't deal with.
Correct.
But what are you doing that you might feel like is normal for you, but is probably different for a lot of recruiters to have that such incredible close rate?
What's normal for me, I took the combination of what I learned from my mom, because she was a super closer, but also what I learned from my psychology and the emotion versus logic thing. The kids that I hired, the younger people, don't like it because maybe they feel it's a little pushy, but it gets us to the bottom of it, So nobody's going to get an offer from a company that I'm representing until I know they're going to say yes. How do I do that? So I first start talking to them, both sides, about the number. What number are we looking at? So first I say to the candidate, what questions do you have, right? So what are your questions you have today, as if you had an offer in your hand that you need to know? And they'll say, well, what do you mean? Well, when you get a number in your hand, I want it to be on this side of this number, I'm a yes. On this side of this number, I'm a no. Okay. But before that, what I want to know is, do you have questions about the company, the location, the color of the tile on the floor, anything? I literally say that to them. Whatever your questions are, let's get them out of the way now. So I'll get them 8 times out of 10. It's, I haven't seen the benefits package. I'll get that for you. Is that the only thing you need? Whatever. I've spoken to wives on the phone. I get them on the phone sometimes. Like if they're reloading, or if I can sense somebody's having an issue there, do you mind if I speak to your wife for a little bit? And I've done that. Anyway, so then I get them to the point where they say, okay, I'm ready to hear the offer. That could take days. A company could come to me and say, hey, I want to make an offer today. Okay, we're not there yet. Let me do my thing. And if they like you and they trust you, they'll let you do your thing. So you go back, you do your thing with your candidate. Hey, you've done a great job. They like you. I sense an offer's coming. You're not saying an offer's coming. I sense an offer's coming because the company's already told you an offer's coming. You don't want to hand them, because you lose your power, right? You lose, they're done with you at that point, right? So, you get to the point where they say, okay, cool. All my questions are answered. I'm comfortable with this, and this. Okay, great. Now, I'm just going to make it up. We originally told them you were looking for 165 base. Is that where you are? Well, after everything I saw, 170 is where I want to be. But I'm like, listen, if we start switching it now, so we go through all that. And then once I get that person to the number where they say, this is where I got to be, as long as it aligns with what we talked about, I'll go back to the company. I'll say, cool, he's ready. He's going to accept at 165. He's probably going to accept on the phone, So I already talked to the candidate and I say, so, it's either me or, Benjamin's going to call you from HR, whoever. We figure that out. And I think he's going to give you an offer, and I already know an offer's coming at 165 or 172. Because sometimes they say, hey, listen, we're going to do a little bit better than that. Because I know when he was doing the conversation with us, he kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit of 165. So we want to make him happy. So we're going to do the 172 or whatever. And, 9 times out of 10, I can get him to say yes on the phone. And then we're off to the races, So I try and eliminate all the variables. Now, what happens a lot of times, the emotion versus logic, is you start getting to the point where they say, well, I've been here a long time, or my boss here is real flexible with me working. You can sense it, right? Again, after, riding the bike for so long, when you're getting wobbly, right? Okay. I hear what you're saying. And when I hear a lot of this, I say to them, we're at an intersection where it's your emotion versus, I call it right out. This is your emotion versus your logic pulling you along. All along, since we started speaking 8 weeks ago, it's been your logic that's pulled you to this point, because you know that there's a reason why we've been doing this. And you've put so much time and effort into this, but now it's your emotion taking over. And I get that. And a couple of years ago, I'd sent you an article, but a couple of years ago, I sent that article to 4 candidates within 2 months and kind of got them over the hump. But essentially what the article talks about, and why I mentioned Charlie Munger earlier, is because, as humans, and this article talks about it too, as humans, for the last 10,000 years, we've all honed our fight or flight skills, right? And it's a real emotional response to something adverse that's going to happen, or something big that's going to happen. But now we click a button to buy a stock, or we buy a house, or we change jobs. Those two heighten our emotions and they cloud our thought process. So what the best thing I found to do is talk to the candidate about, okay, we're here, our emotions could be kicking in, but let's think about what brought us here. Again, our logic. Let's think about this decision, staying put or leaving. Let's think about what that's going to look like in a month, 3 months, a year, 18 months. The same problems are still going to be there if you stay, right? And if you go, you know why you've gone to this extent, so you kind of get them thinking about the compare and contrast now and then, in increments in the future. And that kind of grounds them back in the logical. It sheds the emotional part because the emotional is short term. I mean, we do make, road rage, whatever it is, those are short term emotional decisions that unfortunately could have, and we could think of some other worse ones that unfortunately have some long term ramifications, but they're short term decisions based on emotion, which nobody should be making. So I kind of help get through that. So that's what's led me to the close rate I've had because I got too tired of listening and I had to figure it out, right? I went through all this, right? And I spent a lot of time figuring it out, a lot of heartache, right? But it helped me a lot over the last bunch of years to really get to that point. So, and if I get to a point with a candidate where, you know what, Steve, I need, instead of that 165, I need 182. Well, this isn't going to work then. You're not even going to get an offer. We're not even going to let that. We're not going to waste their time or your time because it's been 165 since the day we started and they're not going to go there. I'm going to tell them that you're looking for 182, but it's not going to go there and they're going to drop you, just so you know. And then I say, are you comfortable with that? You're comfortable if I say 182 to them that you're okay if they drop you. And if they don't say yes and say, well, then what do you want me to say? I can go back and pedal it lightly and say, he doesn't want to lose it. He knows the offer could come in at 165, but he wants to know if you can do any more, that kind of thing, so that the offer stays on the table, but you don't lose it. And, some 6 or 7 times out of 10, the candidate will be okay with that. But if they really all the way along had 182 in mind, we're just saying yes to 165, they're going to be fine walking,
Yeah, true. Ooh, man, I feel like that was like a masterclass right there.
Sorry,
closing
man.
The deals.
I
no,
talk
this is
fast,
great.
and it all hits
This
my
is
head. And
great.
and again, I had people here that work for me were like, that doesn't work. I'm like, it works, man. I'm telling you, it works. Believe me, this is trial and error. A lot of error.
Like, look at all the positions I've closed. There you go.
Yeah. So anyway.
Well, awesome. Before we jump over to the quick fire questions, is there anything else that you want to share or cover about anything that we've already spoken about?
No, I think I think we've done a good job covering a lot of different. I could talk all day about different things with this. So, yeah, if you got me going on another tangent, you're going to be here for another 25 minutes. So I apologize on my rants here.
The rants are the best. That's one of the things I love about podcasting. Well, jumping over to the quick fire questions. And you've been in the game for a while.
Yeah.
So definitely love to hear your answers on these. What advice would you give to a recruiter that's, just getting started in our industry and we'll just say the end of 2024, 2025?
Don't give up. Keep pushing because it's a career that for the right person, right? And there's very few of us that are resilient enough to stick with it, but stick with it. You do have the flexibility. Like I started out, right, with my kids. That's what I needed. And then you're also going to do fine financially, so if you do it right, and the rewarding part is, you get to make a difference. But my advice, don't quit. Don't give up.
And same question, but for people that have been in the game, like let's just say 5, 10, 20, 25 years, they want to get ahead or get to the next level. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I'd say become more of an advisor. I'd say do some value add, right? And I don't say give away candidates and your services, but give away your expertise for free. You don't have to, do a podcast, do something, right? Post, write articles, put out some content that people are going to care about and they're going to want to read so they can see that you're good at what you do, that you are embedded in the industry and that you're not just here to pull moisture off the pipes, right? You're actually adding something. But in today's environment, I would say it's almost the same thing. Don't give up. It's a tough environment right now, in most spots for recruiting. And I've been doing this 25 years. It's never been this much of a rough patch in 25 years. It'll pass. So yeah, don't give up.
Has there been a book that's had a huge impact on your professional career?
I'd say the book I just mentioned, Charlie Munger's book. It's a little tiny thing, and I don't even know if you can find it anywhere. I bought it at this shareholder meeting, From Darwin to Munger. The cover's black, and there's an outline of Charlie Munger on it, and then an outline of a monkey on it, and right next to each other, staring at each other. I thought that was great. I think Charlie was now. I used to say is the best. Just bottom lines everything. Real smart guy. I think more people need to pay attention to what he did and what he said, because he just gave it to people. Didn't really care. I mean, he was 99 when he died, so, and a billionaire, so he could say and do whatever he wants at that point, right? So
you've been in the game for a while. You learned from your mom. You've had your own business for 25 years. What do you think has been a major part of your personal success? Like, what can you attribute it to?
I think constant curiosity, really, and I haven't even talked about this. You got to really want to understand a lot of different things, because the personalities that come into play, different personalities, the emotion versus logic, you got to really be curious. Why did that fall apart? Let's reverse engineer that. Let's understand, was it the company? Was it the process? Was it this? Was it that? There's some organizations that don't care about the the candidate process. I've had companies stick people in conference rooms and hand them lunch and say, have lunch in here. And the candidate will call me and say, I'm not going there because I just got stuck in a conference room. You got to be constantly curious and understand what everybody's drivers are from day one. And then, apply that to your knowledge base and then do research and figure out what that is. If it's only anecdotal too, right? By talking to so many folks, my kids go crazy because of my curiosity level. I basically interview all their friends and I get in trouble all the time. My kids are 24 and 21. Like, you got to stop. You just got to stop. And I'm like, I'm just curious. I honestly want to hear, I'm asking the kid what their drivers are, and that's what I do. I've always done it, so.
What do you think has been one of the hardest lessons that you've had to go through your recruiting career?
That most everything is out of your control. Most everything's out of your control. By going through my process I just went through earlier with the emotion versus logic, I'm trying to reel in something else and pull it into my control. And I do the best I can, but ultimately that whole thing's out of my control, right? At certain points, you got to take your hands off the wheel and say, okay, that's out of my control. Even though right? So, and you've had this happen. You had to have had this happen to you where, a candidate goes the other way on an offer or a company goes the other way on a candidate. And you've been doing this long enough. This is a perfect situation for both. But I had a candidate once. I got so many stories. I got a candidate once. This was about 15 years ago. This guy lived an hour away from where he worked. He calls me and he says, I want to roll closer to home. I said, cool. So I got him an offer at a company I was working with at the time, 10 minutes from home, 15%, 20% raise. Everything was cool. He was done. It was good. And then at the end, he was 62 years old at the time. And he said to me, he called me and said, I just got a job offer from the company that he was working for, which was 50 minutes away, had consultants inside. The consultant said, hey, I know that you're probably going to be gone from this company soon. We'd like to hire you as a traveling consultant. And he was like, my wife and I thought that would be a good idea for me to be a travel. I said, 62, it's wear and tear on the body. And I hit all your drivers of what you wanted. He said, no, I'm going to turn it down. So don't even bother getting me the offer. 3 months later, hey, Steve, is that role still? No, I already filled it. So lots of things are out of your control, but there's also times where something's right and it poof goes away. So it happens.
I know this has been an interesting market, especially we'll say tech, and I feel like maybe bio has been a little safer than other industries. But how have you been able to? You've also been in the game for a while, so you've seen a lot of ups and downs. But how have you made it through those hard days or those hard months?
Well, I mean, I think the best way to get through them is keeping your expertise level up, right? So going to some of these conferences, doing some of these things so that you are making yourself better so that as things come around, you're in a better spot to share your wealth of knowledge that you've learned over that time, right? Whether it's the podcast, whether it's, like I said, some of these conferences, whether it's just chatting with folks in the industry, which I'm doing all day long, right? Folks in the IT industry or the biotech industry to hear what they're seeing as the latest trends and things. So what do I do? Again, with my curiosity level, I just try and keep soaking things up, I have to. We have to. We all have to.
That's awesome. A month or two after you launched your business, you decided to go all in on yourself.
Yep. Instead
of working at another firm, like you start your own recruiting company. Everything that you've learned, everything that you've gone through, the ups, the downs, the pain, the success, the wins. If you can go back and give yourself advice at that point in time, what would you tell yourself?
Personally, I think it's perennial advice that's probably good for anybody. And this is be a better listener. Listen and do your best to understand. As we get older, we understand what people are really saying and what their inflections mean. But you can't underestimate listening to somebody and really, really absorbing what they're saying and what they're really trying to convey, right? You can read between the lines. People say things for a certain reason. In timing, they say things for a certain reason. They say things at certain points for a certain reason. So it's not only what they say, it's how they say it or when they say it, right? It's crazy. There's so much there. So be a better listener. Be a well-rounded listener.
Awesome. And if somebody wants to follow you, how do they go about doing that?
Meaning? You mean
like on LinkedIn or Twitter? Or
I would say LinkedIn.
Now,
yeah,
Instagram.
That's the best for me. Yeah, LinkedIn, because I try and keep it there. I don't have much of a social media presence anywhere else but there. My podcasts are posted in different spots, Biotech Bites, but LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn's the best.
LinkedIn's the best place if somebody wants to follow you. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, this has been an awesome interview, and I'd love how you broke down the secret to closing. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners before I let you go?
I don't think so. I mean, if anybody wants to, again, I'll talk about this all day long with anybody. I don't want to chew up your whole, your monthly allotment for bandwidth, right? But if anybody ever, and if you ever want to reach out, if anybody wants to reach out on anything, I'm an open book. I don't think that there's any secrets for any of us. I think we all need to share. I think we all need to be collaborative. I think we all can help each other. I think that, one person can take on two people can take on the world, right? So we need to help each other out. And that's part of why I'm doing the podcast and part of why I'm doing this.
Awesome. Well, Steve, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing. I think closing is one of the things a lot of recruiters learn in the first 2 weeks, but it takes years to master.
It does. Yeah, it's like riding a bike.
And
each bike rides differently, You feel a wobble at a different point. And if you've seen it for 25 years and you get your butt kicked enough, okay, cool, I got this, So it was fun.
Excited that you shared. And for the listeners, I want you guys to keep crushing it. I want you to make 2025 the year of personal abundance. So let's get it, guys. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Benjamin.